Welcome, everyone. We're beginning now. Welcome to Gramercy Books Author Night, featuring New York Times bestselling author Paula McLain in conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Connie Schultz. Tonight, we're featuring When the Stars Go Dark, Paula's propulsive and poignant tour de force of literary suspense. It was released last month by Ballantine, an imprint of Penguin Random House. I want to thank Ohioana Library, who is Gramercy's community partner for tonight's program. I'm Linda Cass. We're live streaming this program through Zoom webinar, and it will be recorded. Let me preview the next hour or so for you. After introductions, Paula and Connie will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes. That will be followed by 15 to 20 minutes for your questions submitted in the Q&A box. You'll find that icon for the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. If you're using a desk or laptop, it might be on the top of your screen on other devices. This is where Connie will be taking your questions for Paula during the latter portion of this program. Those questions, liked by many others, will be upvoted, which means they'll rise to the top of the Q&A box and may be more likely to be asked. Another tool is a chat box, and I think some of you began chatting in the beginning already. This allows you to chat among yourselves, but it will not be monitored by the panelists. That icon also is on the bottom of your screen, of your desktop or laptop screen. We hope your chats don't distract you from what will be an intriguing conversation tonight. I just want to draw first your attention for a moment to the chat box. So click onto that icon now. It's going to open a column on the right of your screen. We've placed registration links and information for several upcoming live stream programs that are hosted by Gramercy Books. I'm just going to tell you about 3 of them. On Sunday, May 30th at 1 p.m., we feature 98-year-old Selma Vandepeer and her gripping and powerful World War II memoir, My Name is Selma. Selma was a Dutch resistance fighter and Ravensbrück concentration camp survivor. She's going to be interviewed by noted Ohio State University historian, Dr. Robin Judd. On Thursday, July 3rd at 7 p.m., award-winning journalist Alec McGillis will be in conversation with Columbus Business First editor-in-chief Doug Buchanan to discuss fulfillment, winning and losing in one-click America, Alex's literary investigation of Amazon's impact on the wealth and poverty of towns and cities across the country. Finally, on Thursday, June 10th at 7 p.m., we'll feature a conversation about memoir and other forms of creative nonfiction as we feature Lee Martin and his latest memoir, Gone the Hard Road. Lee will be in conversation with acclaimed creative fiction author and editor, Dinty W. Moore. We encourage you to click on the link for any of these programs if you want to learn more about them, as well as register if you'd like. You can sign up on our website, gramercybooksbexley.com, to receive our e-newsletter and learn more about all of Gramercy Books' exciting live stream programs. And hopefully soon there'll be some in person. And now on to tonight's program. In Paula McLain's latest novel, Anna Hart is a seasoned missing persons detective in San Francisco with far too much knowledge of the darkest side of human nature. When tragedy strikes her personal life, Anna, desperate and numb, flees to the Northern California village of Mendocino to grieve. She lived there as a child with her beloved foster parents, and now she believes it might be the only place left for her. Yet, the day she arrives, she learns that a local teenage girl has gone missing. In When the Stars Go Dark, Paula McLain weaves together actual cases of missing persons, trauma theory, and a hint of the metaphysical in this propulsive and deeply affecting novel that tells a story of fate, of necessary redemption, and what it takes when the worst happens to reclaim our lives and our faith in one another. This book is a must-read. Paula McLain is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Love and Ruin, Circling the Sun, The Paris Wife, and A Ticket to Ride. Also, the memoir Like Family, Growing Up in Other People's Houses, and 2 collections of poetry. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Good Housekeeping, O, the Oprah Magazine, Town and Country, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, and elsewhere. She lives in Ohio with her family. Paula, it is a great thrill to welcome you tonight and for Gramercy Books to share your extraordinary novel with our Central Ohio community.
There I am. Hello. Thank you so much, Linda. It's really such a pleasure.
And in conversation with Paula is Connie Schultz. Connie is a Pulitzer Prize-winning, nationally syndicated columnist for Creator Syndicate and professor in residence at Kent State University School of Journalism. She's the author of 3 books published by Random House, a collection of essays called Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths, and His Lovely Wife, a memoir about her husband Sherrod Brown's successful 2006 race for the U.S. Senate, and a novel, The Daughters of Erie-Town, released in June of 2020 and a New York Times bestseller. The paperback edition will be out very soon on June 1st. Connie and Sherrod have 4 grown children and 8 grandchildren. They live in Cleveland with their rescue dogs, Franklin and Walter. Connie, welcome back to Gramercy Books, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Ta-da, there I am. Boy, Linda, as I recall, we did this about a year ago, and it was the beginning of all these kind of book talks by Zoom, right? It's so great to see you again. Nobody has been more supportive of authors in this last period, but especially in this year of the pandemic than you have been. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been an interesting journey for us. I have to say that, and we have a wonderful audience that has been along with us all the way. So thanks to all of you in our audience for joining us this evening. And I'm going to exit here a warm welcome to Paula McLain in conversation with Connie Schultz. I'll be back later in the program.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda.
So welcome, everyone. I want to reiterate what, before I get started talking to Paula, I have so much to ask you. Before I start talking to Paula, I just want to remind you to put your questions in the Q&A. Don't wait. As soon as they come up on your mind, start putting them in. I understand we have a rating system, but I don't always pay attention to that. If your question intrigues me, I'm just going to go ahead and ask Paula. And I'm not going to wait to the end for some of them if I find them, particularly relevant to the conversation we're having. Paula.
Connie, wait. I just want to thank you for being such a dreamboat and agreeing to be in conversation with me tonight and to talk about this book, because I've just so long admired your work and your journalism, but more than that, your presence in the community, your worldview, your whole thing, your gestalt. I think you're fabulous, and this is just going to be so fun. So thanks.
Oh, wow, I didn't see that coming. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. Okay, so now we're going to make it all about you.
I'm never comfortable with that, so we'll see.
Then buckle up, because here we go. As I told you before we went on tonight, I have a habit of reading if I'm going to interview an author, I try to read the books very close to the interview, right? So that everything's fresh in my head and questions are really always have a sense of urgency, at least to me. But oh my goodness, this book. I mean, I am so familiar with your work. I love your writing. I did not see this one coming in so many different directions. And
good, thank you.
Holy cow, it is, I can't recommend it highly enough. And one of the things I was wondering, of course, I read the acknowledgments. I tend to go to those first because they sometimes give me an idea of an author's methods. You did a boatload of research to write this book.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So thank you, by the way, and thanks for reading, Full Tilts. I think you're that kind of woman, but yeah, I've always done, well, for the last 10 years when I've been working on these historical novels, immersive research that's also super intuitive. Like, I don't know what I need to know until I come to a moment in one of my characters' lives, these biographical historical novels. But here, it wasn't just the incredibly new terrain of suspense that I needed to familiarize myself with, the conventions of suspense, but then how to make my character so convincing as an expert in missing persons, and give her a beating heart as well as a perspective that feels significant. Do you know what I mean? Like, it occurred to me at a certain point that because I was writing a fictional character for the first time in a dozen years, really, that the ceiling was kind of off, and I didn't have a biography to follow. I didn't have the historical facts on record sort of shaping my plot. And so I could give my character all of my obsessions, you know? So that was part of my process as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to ask this. Was that, how much of that was freeing? And how often did you feel intimidated by that process, if ever? Because you're right, you can go and look at historical,
Right.
You could look at history in some ways. I mean, you certainly work in some historical details of other crimes, but
Right.
it's very different, for example, writing about Hadley Hemingway.
Absolutely. So for instance, when I'm researching a character, a woman, a real life woman like Hadley Richardson or Beryl Markham, I usually start with biography and then use that as my jumping off point. And then I find letters and photographs and I go into the archives and then I travel and, you know, secondary sources and it's a deep dive. Or for The Paris Wife, then I just had to read everything on Gertrude Stein and Ford Madox Ford and, you know, Fitzgerald and it tarantulas out, right? And in this book, it was really, really interesting to have and it was fear mixed with deep curiosity about how many places the book might go, because I didn't exactly know where the plot was headed when I started off. I just had this character's voice. And so there were happy accidents along the way. And the biggest one, I think, was I decided that I didn't want to write a procedural novel. You know, I'm a character-based writer, and also I wanted to write an atmospheric novel that was also just driven by real people, probing the real questions, even though it's a suspense novel. I wanted to stay interested on that level. And so I decided to set the book in 1993 because I wanted to avoid the internet and I wanted to avoid sort of all the stuff, right? The DNA profiling and even cell phones, right? And so once I did that and I had a draft, you know, of the story it was set in 2016 actually. And I moved it to the 1990s. And as soon as that happened, I was doing some research one day to try to work on the veracity of Anna's voice. And I happened to be listening to a podcast of one FBI agent interviewing a retired FBI agent. And it just happened to be Eddie Fryer, who was the lead detective on the Polly Klaas case. So it was one of those synchronicities that I couldn't possibly see coming. And then as he's talking about 1993. Now I grew up in California, like I remember that case, but I didn't know exactly when it happened. And it turned out that Polly Klaas was abducted in Petaluma, which is 60 miles away from Mendocino, where my drama is set, and 10 days after my imaginary girl went missing. And as soon as I realized that, like all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, because it seemed like it was meant to happen, right? And that my victim and this real girl were contemporaries, even though one was imaginary and one was real. And maybe it's because I had been surfing that line between fact and fiction for so long that I saw the opportunity to continue to surf that in this book. But I didn't go into this novel thinking, oh, it's going to be another one where I make use of fact in order to more deeply inform my story. It came out of nowhere, but then once it came out of nowhere, it felt like fate. Do you ever have those little accidents in your work and you're just following the signs, right? You're following the signs that lead you to the place that it feels like the book wants to go.
When you first started imagining this book, had you decided early that this was just going to be a very different kind of book for you? It was going to be a crime novel in part. That was going to be a definite, to call it a pivot doesn't really fully honor the shift you made from your other work. How conscious was that in the beginning, or was that something that evolved over time for you in the writing of this?
it was not at all conscious in the beginning. I didn't imagine even that I was going to be making a shift from historical, because I was so satisfied in my work. I mean, really satisfied, like deeply connected to the characters I was writing about, and with everything, the entire process, and the way it always felt like an honor to be embodying these women and giving them voice and channeling their lives, and it felt intimate, and 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 it made me happy. Like I was having fun. But then when I was in the middle of Love and Ruin, a couple drafts in, actually. So there I am, I'm in Martha Gelhorn's voice. So Martha Gelhorn, one of the, right? You're a journalist, like one of the most significant, war correspondents of the 20th century, who also happened to be married to Ernest Hemingway. She's Ernest Hemingway's third wife. But so there I am, it's the Spanish Civil War. I'm in Madrid, right? Franco's army has surrounded the city on three sides, and I'm in her voice and deeply in her consciousness. And yet one day when I went for a walk around Shaker Lakes, you know what I'm talking about, Cleveland, with my dog, long walk, like a 3-mile walk, and suddenly this character appeared that I'd never kind of encountered before. And it was Anna Hart, my detective. And it was like going to the movies. Like she came, and I imagined this relationship she would have with the victim that wasn't convenient, that was deeply intertwined and informed by trauma. And that Anna's past, her growing up in foster care, makes her susceptible to the voiceless, to the disenfranchised, to victimhood, to what makes a victim. And so she's a very particular voice. And I just saw that. I saw where it was going to be set. Before I got home, Connie, the whole thing kind of was like shimmering in the air around me.
What did you
happen sometimes, because the imagination is its own machine. Don't you feel like that? It's like its own creature. But just because I had that idea and it had integrity and felt like it had the spidey sense, like all the stuff that we're waiting for, inspiration, that didn't mean that I wasn't flat out terrified, because what do I know about suspense? So it was this tug of war between, do I follow, and it's what we all come to, right? Do I follow my gut? Do I take the risk? Do I play it safe? Do I have the chops? What am I doing? Is my editor going to think I'm crazy? All those questions, right? I had all those questions. And at a certain point, I decided to take a leap, and I told my agent that I'd had this idea. And I really thought she was going to fire me or tell me I was a nutcase or something. And instead, she told me to go for it.
Well, isn't that wonderful when we have those agents who are certainly feel
because of course, right? I mean, we want the people around us to support our growth and our transformation as artists and as women. But sometimes, people, particularly people we really love and who love us, are afraid for us. So they might be cautious, or they might, be tentative. And she could have done that. And also, when I wrote the book and delivered it to my editor, she could have freaked out, but instead she loved it and saw the potential. And in fact, Random House and my whole team gave me an opportunity to grow. And what's better than that?
well,
right? To have that support. Yeah.
Yeah. Random. I mean, I certainly feel the same with the team I've got at Random House. But at the end, it's your name on the book.
Yeah.
It's your story. And in this case, Paula, this is more, correct me if I'm wrong, in some ways, this is more your story than any book you've written.
Yes,
And
that's
I asked your permission beforehand to talk about it because
yeah, thank you.
novelists can get really annoyed when we're constantly asked, well, how did you do this? But you've been candid about this. I mean, you know the foster care experience in the most intimate and painful ways, right? And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Like how that informed your work as you were developing this character.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think from the beginning, as I said, once I saw this character in my mind and I knew she had the potential to take me to a rich place in terms of subject matter, right? I didn't just want to write a thriller. I didn't want to write a mystery. I wanted to write about mystery, human nature, why we do, what drives us. And more than that, I think I've always been fascinated by resilience, survivorhood, and then how we sort of climb out of various emotional and experiential holes, you know, like when life sort of wallops us, like how do we recover? And, you know, when it comes to trauma, is it possible? Is it really possible to, you know, developmental trauma, particularly to recover and to rescue ourselves and to move on? So these are these big questions. But even though I knew my character was going to be probing these, you know, I made my victim an adoptee. And this is how Anna, who grew up in foster care, and Cameron Curtis, my victim, connect on the level of having this shared emotional DNA, this story of abandonment and displacement, early chaos. And I know exactly how that disrupts the self, the creation of a self. Like all this stuff I know in a deep way. I was 4 when both of my parents abandoned my sisters and I. I spent my entire childhood bouncing through the California foster care systems in a variety of homes, all of which were incredibly difficult, right? So I have this inner knowledge propelling this, the subject matter of the book, but I didn't know until the last draft, Connie, that I was going to make Anna a kid in foster care. I didn't know that I was going to give her my story in such a overt way. I think for a while I was like, it was in there. It was like in there, you know, like the easy bake oven, right? The ingredients, you put it in it was already cooking, but it wasn't on the surface until a friend of mine read it, a writer friend, and said, this is amazing. You know, you have to take that last step, right?
This was a friend who was familiar with your background.
Yeah, familiar with my background and knew why I had written the book exactly the way I had written the book. So in the early drafts, that Happen Eden character, who are Anna's really significant, I love those characters too. They were her grandparents. And then suddenly I realized that the whole time these issues of belonging and acceptance and displacement and then finding your way home again, like it was all already in there. And I just needed to step into that place of full disclosure, exposure. I needed to connect the dots. I needed to like step fully in to this character. And that's why it is more personal, because it's not that she's me. It's that when I reached for her backstory, I reached to a place of utter truth for me.
Well, that backstory, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine Anna Hart now without that backstory, because she is discovering, as she's remembering things about her past, it's informing her work on trying to find this missing girl. I mean, it is so intricately woven into the plot at that point. It's hard for me to imagine what that book looked like before this.
Oh, thank you. I think it's that, you know, in suspense, how much suspense do you read?
There's good suspense and not so great. And sometimes I'll feel burned after a couple and leave it alone again. I love watching it in film.
Yeah.
But this was so, I don't want to compare it to anyone else, because first of all, I don't want to offend any friend I forget to mention, but also it's really not relevant. I don't think of it as comparing to anyone else, except your previous version of your work.
Yeah,
I was so
thank you.
delighted to see just the depth and breadth of your talent yet again. I mean,
Thank you. That is so generous of you
I'm
to
not being
say.
generous, I'm right.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
you
Okay.
have these other
I'll
books.
just take the compliment. So thank you. It was wildly freeing for me as an experience to, like I said, feel the ceiling come off. And, you know, when we try something new, and you know this in your own work, right? You have various hats. And just because we can write journalism doesn't mean we can write a novel. Or just because we can write a memoir doesn't mean we can write a novel. And do you know what I mean? It's like you're trying these sideways shifts, and will it work? And can I do it? And can I match the you know, the dimensions of this book? Will I meet it? Will I give it my best? And of course, we always have fear and we always have anxiety as artists. And yet the book really did have so much potential. I knew if I had the courage to kind of step into it, and it was amazing. It was, I love my work. I mean, I love my work, but this was another level.
I have a question.
This was another level.
You know, you were mentioning about other suspense novels. The thing I could not get over with this book, to me, it seems like such a fine line. You don't want to give it away, but you don't want the reader to have felt duped by the end. Like, where did this person?
Like a trick. It shouldn't be a trick.
No.
Yeah. Like,
It
I think we get very, we get very engaged in twisty stories because we like to be surprised. And yet, as writers, we're working on character. And as readers, honestly, you might want to turn pages, but in the end, what you want is an emotional experience.
And you want it to make sense.
And you want it to make sense.
I kept thinking, I didn't see it coming, and yet it made perfect sense. And that is the perfect landing for a book.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have so many more questions, but we have some people asking questions, and I want to give them a chance.
Okay.
I see that Sandy Horn is here, and she wants to know, what does that mean? You said this early in our interview, Paula. What does that mean, giving into your obsessions?
Okay. Good one. So the personal thing I said about always wondering if it's possible to fully recover from trauma, because, you know, I had this really difficult childhood, and sometimes I wonder, with all the therapy and all the, like, what does that mean? What does it mean to trust people again? And so that's in it. I put a dog in it because I love dogs. I put a psychic in it, the book, because I'm fascinated by the metaphysical, even though I don't always believe it. What I'm fascinated by is how much happens in the world that is beyond our rational understanding. I believe that nature can be deep medicine. So I made Anna's foster father a forest ranger, and he gives her a deep understanding of the natural world. But he also gives her an understanding of, I have always since childhood been obsessed with survivor lore, you know, like how to survive in the woods and how to build shelter and how to, right, undo all of that. And if you find a piece of string, can you fish with it? And maybe it's because I grew up a survivor of a different kind. And I really like that tension in this book when Anna arrives in Mendocino at the age of 10, and she has been battered by life. So she is a survivor, but then Hap teaches her how to build competence in herself. And he teaches her that she's a valuable person, and he gives her that anchor. And he becomes her sort of like true north. I never had that in my foster parents, but I basically gave him the father I wished I'd always had, and that I wish for all kids, essentially kind of bouncing through a displaced childhood.
You have that line where she had a lot of mothers, but not much mothering. Really struck. And then with Hap, I love this scene. I don't think this is giving anything away, where he makes her, they're hiking, and then he leaves all the decisions up to her. How are they going to find their way back?
Yes.
And I thought, there she goes again. You, one novel at a time, celebrate the complexities and the strength of women.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering what draws you to that particular theme. Am I accurate in
Yeah.
saying that about your
Mm.
work? That, especially,
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the historical figures, people think they know who they are, right?
Yeah.
I love that you pick Hemingway wives, because I thought his treatment, I don't care for Hemingway's treatment of women for the most
You're not alone.
part. And so it's like you just make us halt and say, just wait a minute, there's so much more going on here. And
Right.
let's look at that. Where does that
Yes.
come from with you, Paula?
I think you're absolutely right. I'm drawn to, I suppose you could call it an obsession of mine too, the excavation of women's lives and how we overcome obstacles, how we become ourselves, how we endure, how we grow, like all of that. I mean, that's the stuff, right? That's the goo. And maybe if I was born a man, I'd be fascinated by men's lives, but I don't know. I'll never know. It's just that I feel like this is my terrain. And particularly when it comes to resilience and self awareness, I don't know, my characters find a way through, right? They find a way through
Yeah.
because I believe that we can change outcomes. You know, I did it. I want to see it in the world. I want to tell that story again and again. I think we need to know that story. Like we love triumph over adversity, right? But sometimes we don't want to know the details because we don't want to look too close at the gritty stuff. We don't want to see, you know, there's dark material in this book, and yet there's darkness in the world. And instead of turning away from it, I feel like facing it is what gives us the knowledge, the belief, the conviction that we can. Right?
You're reminding me of, let me find it. I wrote it down. A couple of things. You remind me of a couple of lines from your book. Getting your heart broken is the privilege of being human. Advice from Eden. And what is all the suffering for, if not so we can see how alike we are and not alone? Where will the mercy come from, if not from us? And you're describing and forcing us to read some, I mean, there are some difficult things in this book, and yet nothing felt too hard for me to keep going.
Yeah. I think to fully answer your question, what I'm always looking for is the hope too.
Huh.
You know?
Well, and it's there. In the hardest moments, it's still there. So I noticed somebody else in there, this was liked, and this is a common question we get when we use historical figures, even if they're not well known, from crimes and stuff, and I thought you could just address it. Did you ask Polly's family if you could use her name / kidnapping in your book?
Yeah. So no, I did not. As with Hemingway's life, for instance, the historical facts on record, an actual person's life it's in the public domain.
Yes, it
And
is.
I decided that, obviously I was afraid I was going to get sued. I was afraid they were going to tell me no. But there was this really interesting thing that happened when I encountered this shimmer of the real victims as I was doing my research. It felt like, and it also felt like this when I discovered Hadley Richardson, and I went to the archives in Boston and read her letters and really started to deep dive into her life. I had this aha moment that, oh my God, this is a real person, and I have a responsibility to her, to honor her life, to give it dignity, and to not have an agenda, except to get to know her. And so I felt similarly when I discovered that, like I said, my victim, who's imaginary, and these real victims. So in California, it wasn't just Polly Klaas, although she was the most well-known, maybe one of the most well-known child abduction cases in modern history. Certainly the largest manhunt in the state of California, and she was everywhere. The media exploded around her, America's Child, but it opened up this question for me: why do some kids get all of that and other kids not? Other kids simply disappear. And so I wanted to ask that question. I wanted to throw that out kind of politically, but then there was just this awareness that I can tell this story, right? I'm writing a novel, and yet this is happening. This has happened. And so it kept me honest. And it felt like a sacred act to include their names, the real names, the way we repeat the names of the dead sometimes in order to keep them alive, and to honor the suffering of their families. And I tried to do it with as much grace and respect as possible. And one of my favorite reviews actually said something that just really struck. I don't know. Do you ever read a review and you're like, finally someone understands what I tried to do? And it's this idea that victims, not the imaginary victims and the real victims, none of them are there for convenience, and none of them are there to propel the plot. They're not there in an exploitive way. It's not supposed to be lurid or any of that stuff that we read for, right? It's to ground this story in truth, and to give the very idea of victimhood a kind of attention, and to shine a light on all of that, because I think it's important.
Well, I would agree with you, but I'm glad you could explain your thinking on that.
Yeah, I know it was a long answer, but I think about this a lot. And, I gave Anna this fascination with victimhood because I'm fascinated by it too. And with this idea in the book, I'm sure you read it, of the bat signal.
Yes.
Yes. And so there's this idea that exposure to violence really opens us up to the possibility of more violence, particularly if it happens when we're young. And I met with a trauma therapist once who told me that about my own experience, and said, everyone comes into the world with a bright light. Absolutely everyone comes into the world with a pure soul. But then trauma happens to 1 in 4 or 1 in 7, abuse, victimhood, whatever, fill in the blank. And then it creates a kind of black tar. And when the light shines through, it creates a bat signal. And the predators can sense this. And this is what a trauma therapist told me about my life. And so it went into the book because it happened as I was writing it, and it belonged to the book. And it's sort of everything kind of, how that happens when you're writing a book and it's really going, everything that happens belongs in the book. You see a green car, there's a green car in the book, of course, because, right? I met a dog, Cricket, when I was doing an event in Pasadena. I put Cricket in the book, And so, yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes what people don't often understand about writers is that's exactly what's happening, is we're still out in the world. I mean, I would like to say most of the best writers are like that. They don't sequester themselves from life. They sequester themselves for chunks of every day, perhaps, from everyone else. But we're in the world, and these spark more ideas. And wow, that's quite a backstory to that light. Thank you for that. And I want to read a comment from Jane Herman. I want to make sure you hear it. She's watching from Half Moon Bay, south of San Francisco.
Oh yes, I know it.
And she has worked in the child welfare system in California for many years. And she writes, it just takes one good person to show you your potential, even if that person is yourself. Can't wait to read the book.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
You're gonna love it, Jane. You're gonna recognize.
Thank you, Jane. That's beautiful, and I think that's absolutely true. I think a lot of kids in the system, myself included, don't ever get told, right, that they're interesting, that they're fun to talk to, that they have value, so they are, self-esteem becomes a problem, but it really just does take one adult, especially a teacher, a librarian. For me, it was often a librarian who saw me and handed me a book and saw me, and liked seeing me and made that clear. And that makes all the difference.
Wow. Someone named Sam said, did you deliberately leave some, people love to think about sequels, right? Did you leave some openings for there to be a part 2? Will and Anna solving crimes together and conquering their demons.
Oh, I love that reading, Conquering Their Demons. Yes, I deliberately left some holes. Number one, because I don't like books that wrap everything up neatly, because life is not neat and doesn't come packaged that way. But the book does, it's like, is Hap alive or not? And what happens when Anna goes home, and what will happen with her marriage? And what about those cases in the 1970s? Were they linked, and will Will still stay obsessed about them? There are these threads in the outer world. And then what about Anna's siblings, right? But then there are other deeper threads. That's why I like Sam's question, because Anna, in a way, has just started to deal with her shit, and I'll just say this quickly because it was part of my research and I didn't say it earlier. I was lucky enough to team up with a real detective, a retired detective, who read the novel and really helped me, again, like develop a kind of granular veracity to Anna's voice and a kind of authority, and helping me with certain moments and understand scenes. And she became obsessed with Anna, like totally obsessed with her, and would talk about her as if she was a real person. And one day she called me and she's like, okay, I just went on a long bike ride and I was thinking about Anna, and I just want you to know, I think she has more work to do in the world.
Oh, I love that. My heart fluttered a bit when you alluded to the possibility that Hap is not dead.
I don't know. What do you think?
I would love to think he's got some explaining to do, but
he has a lot of explaining to do.
I love it. And somebody asked here, so the reason I'm careful on some of these questions because I don't want to give away plot lines, but since you brought him up, she said, why did you decide to have Hap disappear?
So I'm going to let you in on a secret. Writers don't always know what's going to happen. And they don't always know when something appears in a scene that that's where it was heading all along. And so that is, again, the power of the imagination. Like, our subconscious is creating a shape as we work. And so we'll get to a scene and then suddenly one thing happens when we thought another thing was going to happen. And so in the scene that I was writing, that's what happened. And I decided that that was an apt plot line, and that Anna had enough, he had given her enough tools to move forward. Because in the end, we don't get to keep each other, Connie. Like, we don't. Like, as humans, we don't. And even parents at a certain point can't give us more. And we have to make our own way. And I think I was interested in that. What Anna is really, in a way, anchorless, but also anchored, because sometimes when we feel most alone, we just have to remember who's behind us, right?
I think that line, we don't get to keep each other, is in your book, is it not?
It is in the book. It is in the book.
That line. I remember feeling the painful truth of it. That we
Yeah. Hap tells that in a scene to Anna when she sort of dreamed him, and he says that, we don't get to keep each other, but we're always here. It's like when you look up at the sky, you can't always see the stars, but they're always there. And that's the title,
Mm-hmm.
That's how the title found its dimension.
We're getting some great questions here. Mindy Wright wants to know, in your historical fiction, what process do you go through to, and she puts in quotation marks, sound like women at the heart of each book?
Oh, okay. It's my favorite thing because I did it with Anna too. I feel like my entrance point, and I'd be curious to know what your entrance point is as a novelist. My entrance point into story is voice. And maybe it's because I was a poet, right? It's getting the voice right. And so with someone like Hadley Richardson, I have letters. And with Beryl Markham, I had her book, West with the Night. So I could, in a way, it's almost like almost like an actress's exercise, where suddenly I just try to climb into the character as deeply as possible and see out their eyes. And it's why I write in the first person, for instance, right? And it's why I wrote this book in the first person present tense, because I really wanted to feel like it was happening in the moment, to get closer and closer and close the gap, that narrative distance. I wanted that to collapse. How do I do it? Yeah, I read journals and diaries. I listen to tapes. I try to find all the books, Martha Gelhorn's war reporting.
Yeah, that's really something.
You know, and her books and her letters were published and her journals. And I was really able to hear her in my head. But that's what we're always doing as writers anyway, right? I mean, you're in any scene of dialogue, you're hearing those voices. And I know it makes a non-writer think that we're all just schizophrenic.
Well, that's right. Sharon tells a story of when I was in revisions for my first novel and I was gardening. And he heard me suddenly say, "Oh, you're right, you're right. You would never have said it like that." I go running into the house. And of course, you know, these are those moments when people who love us start to wonder, has it happened? Have we really?
Yes.
And I just said, I was thinking of my character, Ellie McGinty, and I said, she would never have done what I had her do. And if she is going to do that, we got to understand why that change happened. And it just occurs when you're not thinking about it. I remember Kate Medina years ago, my editor at Random House, saying, walk away from it for a while because your mind will keep writing. If you give your mind a break, it's still working on the book. And
and on the back burner, I love that character, by the way, and it's a beautiful book. And I think that we're interested in a lot of the same things, actually. And there are many nuggets that I underline in that book where a wisdom floats to the surface. It's a human wisdom and it's earned through experience.
Well, that's really would describe what you're doing. Thank you. I mean, maybe that's why, in part, I loved your book so much, is these, particularly the women, but also Hap, we learn with them. We don't doubt the voice of authority that you're giving them because we know how they got there.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important development in characters. And it takes time, right? You got to get to know your characters to do that. Let's see. I'm looking here. Michelle Soka, I want to pronounce that correctly, said, she's another viewer just south of San Francisco. Paula, you captured the beautiful but eerie spirit of Mendocino perfectly. That landscape almost became another character in the book. Can't wait to see where you go next.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, that's another sweet spot for me as a writer, I suppose, is place. And a reader once said that about my historical fiction too. You know, she sort of stood up at the back of the room when I was doing an event and said, "Where are you taking us next?" You know? And so, yeah, Mendocino is a place that's really important to me. And so it definitely informs in a real way the world of the book. And it's the perfect place to set a suspense novel because it is so, if you've never been, Connie, have you ever been?
I have not.
So it's this Victorian village. It looks like Maine. And that's why Murder, She Wrote was set there. It looks like Maine, and yet it's on this bluff and the Pacific is roaring below. It's surrounded by redwood forests and this eerie fog creeps in, and it's just like time out of time. It's this beautiful but slightly otherworldly kind of vibe that I love. I just love it. I love it.
I agree that it does take on almost a full character of its own.
Yeah.
And that's I mean, that takes some fine writing to get there. Because
I think I know a Michelle Solka. I don't know if that's the person who asked a question, but if it is, then hello and thank you.
Leslie Robinson wants to know, did writing this story help you uncover or heal more of your story?
Oh, these are good questions.
Right.
Whoever these people are, you are engaged. This is amazing. And it's letting us have a really rich conversation too. I like it. It feels connective. So I've always been very suspicious of catharsis. And you know, when I wrote a memoir that was published in 2003 by Little Brown called Like Family, and it's about my foster care experience. And I would always get that question, was it cathartic? Do you feel like it helped you let something go? And personally, I don't believe that we can let go of our stories with any real relief, and that the relief and the healing comes with letting it in, with not running away from it, and with accepting all of these parts of us, the light and the dark, the good and the bad, and all of it, everything, to take it in and to carry it forward. And so, is it cathartic? No, but I'm freer for sure.
Oh, wow. So I guess the last question I have for you is what's next, Paula? Are you already at work?
What's next? I don't know. I really like the idea that Anna might have another story, but I'm also I feel like so much is possible now that I've made this big change, and I proved to myself in a way that I could do it. So now I've built trust. And in a way, it's going to sound very strange, but my work, besides my family, it's my most intimate relationship. This is a relationship that I've built. It's deep. And now I'm just building more trust that I can follow a crazy idea to a rich place. And so now I'm just open to what might come next. It's my favorite thing, this waiting for lightning to strike and for the engine to start again. And I'm very hopeful right now and excited and just thankful to you for this conversation, and thankful to everyone out there who's listening and kind of following along in a really, it feels like a really significant way. And this has been such a treat for me. I was worried about going on tour, as I'm sure you were, when your hardcover came out last summer. Like, what does this look like? And I'm not going to be able to look at it, to see people's faces listening to my jokes, and I won't hear their stories when they come to meet me afterwards. But it still offers these nuggets of like real rewarding connection and conversation. So that's just, I'm grateful.
You sound like you're leading with gratitude, which is always a great way to move forward. And I too want to thank all the readers out there tonight, and all the ones that joined. I'm really grateful for this conversation. So thanks, Paula. And I think we're waiting. Olivia, you coming back to join us?
Here I am.
Hello.
Hello. Oh my gosh, this was so wonderful. It was such an illuminating conversation. So you went very deep, and that's how the book was too. What wonderful questions, Connie, and such a stunning novel, Paula. And in such an engaged audience we had. Everyone, you have to get this book.
Thank you.
If you have not read this book, you have to get this book. And Paula, and thank you for bringing The Daughters of Erie-Town, because that was going to be my next comment, that you have to get The Daughters of Erie-Town. It comes out June 1 in a paperback. So we will give you links in one moment for both of them. But I just really want to express to both of you how wonderful this conversation was. I know the audience feels the same way. So I'm speaking for a lot of people. And just thank you, both of you, Your writing and what you offer us is with the heart, and it's very special.
Yeah. Thanks again, Connie. I hope our paths meet sometime in real life, as they say. And I loved hearing your dogs barking for a while. That's real life. I've paid my son to keep mine quiet. So,
I should have paid Sharon. It never occurred to me. Bye, everyone.
All right. Good night.
Good night, everyone. I want to just remind you that there's going to be links in your chat box, so look at them. There's to register for the programs we mentioned, but a link also to both of these wonderful writers' books. And please tell everyone you know, because they deserve to be read. Gramercy Books is open 7 days a week. Please come visit us 10 to 6, curbside pickup, and very grateful to everyone for spending part of your evening with us. And we want to see everyone in person soon. Again, Paula and Connie, you're the best.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Gramercy Books. Bye, Connie. Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye.